My name's Alana Mosley. I'm a flood engineer with the City of Moreton Bay, and I am also a member of the Floodplain Management Australia Young Floodplain Managers Queensland Committee. Thank you for joining us for our first webinar of 2024. I'll begin with an acknowledgement of the traditional custodian. So I mentioned I'm from the City of Moreton Bay. The City of Moreton Bay LGA encompasses an area which goes over the traditional land of three different traditional owners, the Jinnabara, the Cubby Cubby, and the Turrbal people. So I'd like to take the moment to acknowledge the land that I'm present on, the people of this land, and pay my respect to them, their elders in particular, past, present, and emerging. And I like to add, with the acknowledgement of country, either an opportunity for you to learn something new or an event, so that it's a little bit more involved for everyone here listening today. So I want to highlight that in City of Moreton Bay, there's regular women's weaving and yarning circle events. They occur in multiple locations. The next one coming up in Deception Bay. And it gives an opportunity for people to have a chat with our local First Nations residents and their elders, and also a chance to learn about the cultural practice of basket weaving. So if you live on the north side of Brisbane, might be an opportunity you're interested in. So for those who are new to this webinar and haven't participated in our events before, we're the Young Floodplain Managers Network. We're part of the Floodplain Management Australia group. And we exist to represent, engage, and inspire young floodplain management professionals across Australia. And by young, I mean early career professionals, people with around about 10 years experience, sort of a thing. That's who we particularly target our events towards. So of course, anyone's welcome to come along and attend. If you haven't already, you can sign up to the Young Floodplain Managers via the FMA website. It just involves submitting a form with your name and email address, and then you're considered part of the Young Floodplain Managers Network. I recommend, though, that you also join our LinkedIn group. We try to post our upcoming events on there regularly. You can then come along and participate in YFM events, and if you want to, you can contribute to creating events in the future. And things like this webinar, we record them and we save them on the members section of the FMA website. If you're curious, there's a bunch of past recordings on there available to you right now. If you don't have a login to the FMA section, members section of the website, talk to someone in your organization about if they're an organizational member. They should be able to give you a password, or once you confirm that your organization is a member of the FMA, you can contact FMA and get your own username and password set up. So if you haven't heard from our quarterly FMA meetings recently, the Young Floodplain Managers Group in Australia comes up with the vision every year, and I wanted to highlight to you some upcoming events for 2024. This is obviously our first event for the year, quarter one, tick. Quarter two, we're all focused on the FMA conference, which is happening from the 21st of May. And I'm really excited this year because we've got a couple of new initiatives occurring. Usually at the FMA conference, the first day of the conference on the Tuesday, there's a couple of workshops. And this year I'm excited to say we're having a workshop specifically for early career professionals in the flood industry. It'll be the Try Water Innovation Challenge, which some of you might know we tried to launch in 2022, but it had to be postponed for various reasons. It's confirmed. It's happening in 2024 at the conference. Tickets will be announced soon. Later on this year, Q3 will have another webinar opportunity, but then in Q4, we're looking to have a dam tour with Seqwater. So keep your ears open for that event also. So our event today, our webinar, it came about from a conversation at the FMA meetings. It was said that there are some early career professionals who find themselves in the position where they're interacting with members of the public who have recently been flood affected, and those conversations can sometimes be a bit challenging. So we've reached out to members of the floodplain management industry who are not engineers and who have a daily role in interacting with people who have been affected by flooding. So we're really excited to welcome Jo to this webinar. She's from an organisation called Community Plus. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and allow Jo to take centre and front to introduce herself and share with us some of her experiences.
Thanks, Alana. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I really appreciate these things, having this opportunity. I don't have any screens to share. I'm a bit of a hand when I talk, I wave my hand, so apologies. I'll just be reading. I've put something together. I'm just going to read it through. And I'd like to start with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I come from today, the Yagara and Turrbal land, and acknowledge how lightly they lived on this land and how much we could learn from how the history of that. I started as a volunteer, so I work for Community Plus Queensland. I am what's known as a service navigator and case manager, working with people post 2022. But I started this work as a volunteer after the 2011 floods in Brisbane. We had very little funding, but we had a huge community push and support from charity organisations at the time. We were completely grassroots with a solid and consistent team of rolling volunteers and donors. There were no expectations from homeowners. Anything and everything was a welcome bonus for their recovery. Out of this volunteer effort, the Yeronga Community Centre was born. We were auspiced by West End Community House initially. Then from then we've grown to 3 centres across Brisbane. Becoming Community Plus Queensland. Our centres are socially inclusive and operate under a community development framework. I'm part of the community resilience team is what we're known as, and we also operate under that community development framework. So whilst we're working with people to help them recover in their homes and rebuild in that way, we also look at opportunities within the communities to build resilience across that community when those, and connection as well, resilience and connection, which kind of go hand in hand. So in March 2022, our centre became a flood recovery hub. We opened 7 days a week. Our setup was from 7 a.m. and we rarely left the centre before 6 p.m. So we did get to speak with a lot of people that were fresh in that trauma following the flood. We hosted workers from Community Recovery Services Australia to assist with emergency payments, as well as charities like Red Cross, Salvation Army, Lifeline. We had Department of Housing there as well, and we used to see between anywhere from 100 to 150 people come through the door a day. Our organisation has become well known for our wraparound approach, particularly in the lead up to, during and post disasters. Many of our volunteers step up at the time, and some of those have been with us since the 2011 flood. This time government took on a new recovery model for the 2022 post-disaster period with the introduction of the Resilient Homes Fund program. A decision was made to fund community workers as service navigators and case managers to work alongside homeowners to navigate the various government grants available to them. There is another government grant called the Structural Assistance Grant, which is means tested, and that's for people who didn't have insurance and are on low incomes. So that's another grant that we assist people with, and we try and do those hand in hand. We sit between government and homeowners to bridge the gap. Government have a much sharper focus on building back better in flood-prone regions and reducing risk to people and place. Our role helps to identify and assist people who could potentially be left behind due to the demands of the process itself, financial and emotional barriers that prevent them from moving forward. We are supported by other specialty services such as mental health services, financial counselling services, and free legal, to name a few. There's also a number of charities that still support this work. Salvation Army and Give It are two of those charities. Currently, most of us are funded until June 2024, with the hope that funding will be extended so that we can see people through at least to the recovery of their home. As service navigators, we visit people often in their homes and in our workplace as well. Our team is made up of workers who have previously studied and or been employed in the community sector. So people are generally our thing. However, opportunities to take part in workshops delivered by our mental health support services have been very valuable working in this space. Chris and Iris are a big part of that. They're a great support for the work that we do. As community support workers, we have experienced a very steep learning curve in a short space of time, having to take a deep dive into house raise, retrofit, soil test certification, and surveyor talk. Relationship building with contractors has been key to any successes we've had so far. Those relationships last a few months to a few years and have been essential to our work and the people we support. So I'm just mentioning that because it's kind of like, I guess, a bit of a flip to what we're doing today, because we've had to learn a bit of, jargon that we've never, and language that we've never had to have in our vocabulary before, but we've been able to do like the most basic stuff so that we can get through our job, which I guess it's a bit of a flip on today, maybe. Yeah, so just that sort of the notion of being able to access an expert as such, I think is a really good, how valuable it is for us to not try and do each other's jobs, but have that, be able to access each other for that support. And sometimes it can come down to a half hour you might have with someone on the phone or in person. In most cases, if they are aware of the role you play in their recovery, they can be made comfortable with your presence and involvement. Some people need to know more, some people choose to know less. Every person's response to these events is different, as you can imagine. Every stage is different, and in many, many cases, it's not just about their house. They still have all the other stuff going on in their lives. These type of events seep into your day-to-day life, your work, your relationships, and the longer the recovery period, the more fatigued people become, of course. They're fatigued by processes, but they're also fatigued by the number of people that come through their homes, who are virtual strangers to them most of the time. So we find that people, they lose track of who's been through, and they're confused about who is this person and why are they here, and yet we all have these important roles, but sometimes they're over it, So Chris and Iris can probably speak more to the stages that follow a traumatic event, like a natural disaster. My approach is never to make assumptions when I'm engaging with someone. I just meet them where they are at, and that can be very different each time I engage with them, or if I'm engaging with someone for the first time. So it's not about the weeks and the months and the years. It ebbs and flows all the way through for people. After chatting with Alana yesterday, I thought I'd speak to the scenarios that she mentioned are most common for your profession. We talked about home visits and some group or community gatherings that you might do. So looking at your interactions with flood-affected community members as being mostly brief, perhaps spending up to a couple of hours in their company. Maybe I am making an assumption there, so but that's what I'm going to speak to. So I've just done some dot points, which I'm happy to sort of elaborate on later, you know, when we do the panel discussion or however it's going to work, Alana. But this is kind of what I work with. I always ask permission from people. So some examples are like, are you okay with me visiting today? Are you comfortable with me making my way around to do my work or inspection or whatever you're there for? Do you mind talking about the damage that occurred? Do you mind showing me the height of the water? Things like that. So just always asking permission. Is it okay in this moment to ask you these things? Or yeah, how comfortable are you with me being here? Explain who you are and what your role is in their recovery. So, you know, if you're here, I'm here to gather evidence. I don't make the decisions. The information I gather then goes to the next step. My visit here helps things move to the next stage of this process. So just reassuring them that what you're doing is essential to the process, but you're not necessarily the one that can make the decisions or solve all the problems. I always put, well, yeah, time frames are a good idea, like putting a time frame around your visit. Sorry. And be clear about what you'll be doing there. So it can be something like, I need about half an hour to just concentrate on taking measurements or readings. I'll need to inspect throughout the home if that's okay. Sorry for the intrusion, but this is all part of the process. We can chat again at the end before I need to move on to the next job or site. Or get back to the office. I'd love to hear more of your story, but I'm sorry, I'm on a pretty tight schedule. Also, a big thing is using language that people can understand, because, yeah, like I don't have a brain like most of you sitting here today. So we find that speaking in levels and things like that, like people, if they've got a visual, like a landmark or something like that, if that comes up in whatever you're doing, you know, sorry if I don't have enough knowledge about exactly what your visits entail or interactions entail, but yeah, just, I guess, just using language that people in general can understand. Otherwise they get very overwhelmed. On the other hand, you might have people that are retired engineers, or they just have a real interest in this sort of thing. It's kind of, if you've got the time to just acknowledge their experience or their knowledge about something, the kind of work that you're doing, that's kind of a nice thing to do too. And then just around I guess knowing what supports are available, like, so not having to know all the details of the services that are available for people who have been flood affected, but even being aware of the Service Navigator program it's only being run till June 24 currently, as I said, but there's service navigators across many of the LGAs in Queensland. So even having that information, if you can tell that someone's really struggling with this whole process of whatever you're doing with them, I mean, our client base is people that were affected by the 2022 flood, as I said. So it's Resilient Homes Fund, and but if it's an insurance, but you can see that people are struggling, but it's come from that 2022 flood. You can find out the service navigator in that LGA and refer them through, and then they can refer them to support services that are available. And also, if if you're consistently in the same sort of area, and you're doing this kind of work and you're coming across distressed people, know your local neighbourhood centre or community centres in that region. You can always send people to those to get referrals and support as well. And that's just about, I guess, it's sort of about their well-being, but also about yours, because sometimes it's hard to walk away if you've done your bit, but you're leaving this distressed person there. If you know you can actually send them to somewhere else where they can get extra support, then maybe that's going to feel better for you as well. And the only other thing the only other thing I would say is Alana mentioned when you have community events, you mentioned at libraries and things like that, Alana, when you're doing showing research or getting some sort of feedback from community. Maybe, I'm not sure if it's accessible to you, but having some mental health support there from one of the services, Lifeline or whoever you can engage, particularly if the event is still raw, and those events can be raw to people for a very long time. So, yeah. So I guess, just sorry, I've gone off track, but I'm
No, that's been really excellent, Jo. I have been madly writing notes for myself in my own day-to-day work based on what you've been saying. So thanks so much. That's excellently on point. Do you mind if we pause that there and pass on over to Chris, or is there a key message you want to leave us with?
No, not at all. The only other thing I was going to say is I'm happy to share contact details if anyone wants to reach out to me. But thanks for your time.
Oh, that's excellent. Thanks so much. So for people who are not familiar with the usual format of these YFM webinars, we tend to have our two also speaker sessions. We'll then break into virtual breakout rooms to discuss the speakers' presentations and think of questions. Then we'll come back together again into the main room and host a panel session. And if you didn't see on your LinkedIn calendar invite, we are thinking that this one will go beyond the hour, as in we're going to have our second presentation now, then we'll break into the breakout rooms, and the panel session will probably occur after 1 o'clock for the most part. So I'm hoping you were able to organise your lunch break to be a little bit longer today. So I'm very excited now to welcome Chris and Iris to the screen. Who've got a little bit of a different background to Jo, but work closely with Jo. So Chris, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I do have a PowerPoint slide. So do I need your permission to do that, or just?
If you do have one, I think it's set up for you to share your screen now. And give it a crack, see if it works.
Can you see it?
Not yet.
Okay.
You minimize that. Sorry.
Yeah, you don't.
I should put my glasses now. So we go share screen, and then this one.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I just did it in the wrong
one. Share. Can you see now?
Yep, that's come through. We're seeing the PowerPoint as in everything on the side, and now we're seeing its full screen. Thank you.
Yay.
Awesome. Yay, we got there in the end. So thanks for inviting us today. We always enjoy getting out and talking to people in community and sharing the work that we do. And we do work very closely with Jo at the Yeronga Community Centre, but also, as Jo mentioned, there's service navigators in lots of different community centres. So we try and stay involved and engaged with the community through the centres that way. So we are the Metro South Addiction Mental Health Service, a nice acronym there for everyone, disaster flood team. So we've been funded to support people psychologically and emotionally who have been affected by flood and storms. Our funding was initially just for the Brisbane 2022 flood event, but we have actually now been given, let's say, permission to support people after our Christmas storm event here as well, which was Gold Coast and Logan area. So we are on board until December 2024 at this stage, always hoping for another extension though. So we're a team of nurses, social workers, psychologists, occupational therapists, psychiatrists, and admin officer. So I'm a psychologist by trade, was previously a nurse, but that was in my last life, so we won't talk about that. So I came over to Queensland Health for the first mental health recovery and resilience team, which was funded to support people after the 2011 floods in Brisbane. So started doing the work, really loved it. And then this other opportunity came up for another team. So we've been on board since, I think it was November 2022. So it's very rewarding work. It's very different. We do a lot of different things under the mental health umbrella. So we do support people individually. So we have referrals just for people who are still struggling, but we also do capacity and resilience building in the communities. So we're doing workshops and things like that. Iris, do you want to talk about your background?
Hello, I'm Iris. My background, my professional background is I'm a registered nurse. In terms of disasters, so my journey in disaster recovery started many years ago. So overseas, I worked here with refugee children and displaced young people. But that was many years ago. More recently, and again, it is quite a, when I'm talking more recently, it's actually 10 years, I think. I've been involved with multiple different events, so cyclones, bushfires, then obviously COVID pandemic, response for Metro South addiction and mental health, and this floods in 22, and now Christmas, New Year's Eve event as well. So I've been always, it seems like, following disasters, or disasters have been following me. It's either, whichever way you want to look at it. But I think for every one of us who are working in this field, it is so important to carry that passion, to work with people impacted, because that's when are people the most vulnerable and most needing that support from someone to give them that initial hope. But that's it.
Okay, so next slide. So this is our flyer here on the right, just to plug our team a little bit. So we accept referrals for anyone who's been affected by the floods, and we have a very simple referral process for anybody who has been affected in Metro South area. So it's a simple QR code referral. We're very proud of our gumboots. I think it's the best thing to come out of Queensland Health Media for a while, or if ever. But on there, importantly, we do list the warning signs for, just if people are struggling. Sleep's probably a big thing that we see out in community where, families in crisis. And I think, as Jo mentioned, there's a lot of complexity, especially now 2 years after the floods. So we're seeing people who have just been impacted with the Christmas, New Year's storms. So we were part of the recovery centre response up at Mount Tamborine and Jimboomba mainly, but we're still seeing people after the floods, so a couple of years on. So yeah, quite different presentations. So just in terms of, there is I guess I didn't put the graph in about the recovery from disaster, but as Jo mentioned, I mean, people move in and out of recovery in that space, just depending on what's happening with them, what's happening in their family situation, environment, and the impacts of all those things together. So when we're talking about recovery from trauma, there's three main phases that I guess we can look at. We're mainly working in the safety and stabilisation phase, especially initially, but also with a lot of people, they'll always be in the safety stabilisation phase. We're not always going to be trying to process the trauma because some people just simply aren't ready for that. And, you know, they just want to get on with their life and live their life the best they can. So they're the sorts of things that just the coping strategies, helping with sleep, calming techniques, breathing, relaxation, those sorts of things, just so people can have a little bit of a relief from their symptoms. So these are just some of the common reactions that we might see. I think definitely a couple of years down the track, we are seeing, you know, that frustration with insurance, with funding. People are still living in homes without walls or with mold, things like that. So they've been waiting for things to get back to, you know, their normal. And that can be quite distressing for people. So it is sort of long-term stress that we're looking at as well. So I've got slides here. I'm trying to move through them a bit quickly. So I guess with definitely with our first response, we come from a psychological first aid perspective. We do actually offer workshops on psychological first aid, but they're about 3 hours. So I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. Other than that, these are the principles that we do follow in all our work, really. So we want to make sure people feel safe, that we're helping them to, you know, stay calm. Connect with others is a big one. So linking in with other services and supports, helping people, you know, develop that belief that they're able to help themselves and get through, and also instilling hope. What did I do?
For sharing.
No, sorry guys. Where's the button? Man,
That's all right. It started sharing screen again, which is good.
yeah, I'm onto it. I just pressed the wrong thing. So probably just one of the main things around PFA is that human compassionate approach, but just in terms of communication, and I think Joe touched on this before as well, just when people are distressed or they've experienced a trauma, you know, they can have difficulty with concentration, memory, decision making. So it's really important just to try and keep the communication as simple as we can. We normally try to provide handouts and things, especially when we're working in the recovery centres, just so you can give people something to take away. You know, any way that we can kind of reinforce the information we're giving them, because people will sit down, you know, a week later and say, I actually can't remember what they said, or we'll go and see people and they won't remember the people that have come to visit them at home. So it's really good just to provide information for them to take away, or encourage people to take notes. So just in terms of, I guess, the more practical things, you know, when we're talking with people and supporting people in recovery centres or in our own work, it's good to just try and find somewhere private, quiet, a safe place to talk, just to allow people, you know, to express what they're feeling, what's happened. We never pressure people to tell their stories. But we're there to listen if they want to share what's happened. And for some people, that can be very important to tell their story. For other people, they just don't want to do that. We need to be patient and calm as much as we can within, you know, we all have our own time constraints and things like that, but it's good just to, I guess, give people your full attention but also, listen actively. We always acknowledge how people are feeling, try and put it in a, I guess that idea of, normalizing their experience. So, quite often they are having what's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, because people will come in and sit down and say, I feel like I'm going crazy, or what's wrong with me? Why am I all of a sudden crying? And we allow people, we sit with a box of tissues and just allow people to talk and to cry if they need to. So it can be difficult to sit with that, definitely. And getting to that level where you feel comfortable just allowing somebody to feel what they're feeling. But usually we do see people who come in and they've been holding it together, doing everything practically, and then all of a sudden they sit down and take a breath and they start to actually feel the emotional impact of what's happened. So these are just some things that came out of the psychological first aid research. So this, I guess PFA, just for background, is the framework that's a worldwide framework just for first responders. So here in Australia, Red Cross lead the way with PFA. So they're volunteers mostly. So they do that initial meet and greet at recovery centres and provide that support. But anybody working in the recovery centres needs to have psychological first aid training or knowledge. So yeah, just some of their guidelines would be, always consider age, gender, culture and language, the differences that might mean for the person in front of you. And that again, I think comes to just allowing people to talk and try to understand their situation. It's okay to ask questions, to clarify if you don't understand. I think people are quite okay if you say, look, I really would like to understand what it's been like for you. That can be really helpful in them feeling like they're listened and in us actually knowing where they're coming from as well. Just I guess in mental health as well, attention to non-verbals can be important, because sometimes people will be saying, yeah, everything's okay, and you can kind of just see them sitting there trying to hold things together, or, they might be really angry but not wanting to express what they're actually feeling. And a big one, keep language simple without technical terms or jargon. So we in Queensland Health love a good acronym. I don't know what it's like in the engineering field, but when we forget we're talking to other people, and it'll be, hey, hang on, what does that mean? And you go, oh, okay, sure. So it's good just to try and keep it in layman's terms, I guess, when we are talking to people. So they do not say things like you should be lucky, you should feel lucky that you survived. And it has been said, or just saying to people, everything's going to be okay, or you'll be okay, because we don't always know that. It's better just to sit with somebody and say, you've been through a really difficult situation. It's understandable you're feeling the way you're feeling. Do not compare their situations. A lot of people will come in, especially, I think, we saw quite a few elderly, vulnerable people up in Mount Tamborine after the storms, and they would come in and go, oh yes, but such and such down the road had it much worse than us. So, we don't want to be a burden. Those sorts of things do tend to come through as well. Don't feel like you have to solve all their problems. So, I guess we all have our own roles. We have our own, what we need to do when we're interacting with people. And I think Jo also said this before, just around being aware of other supports that might be available in the area that you can link people in with, so that you're not leaving them. Like, it's the worst thing is to actually see somebody really distressed and not be able to kind of help them and know that they're going to be okay once we step out. So it's good just to even just check to see if people have family around in those situations. Yeah, and people won't remember the exact words, but they will remember how you made them feel. And that's really just around connecting with people. And those things are just, yeah, being genuinely interested, genuinely wanting to help the person. And these are just some useful links and further training if people are interested. Red Cross have multiple things online just around disaster recovery. Phoenix Australia are the go-to for any trauma-informed care or post-traumatic stress disorder. And Queensland Government also has a bunch of stuff about disaster. Sorry, did I go? So I guess just in terms of the practical stuff, I know difficult conversations are part of our everyday work, I guess. You know, we're ringing people up on the phone, not really knowing. We'll just get a phone number and a name. So yeah, I think it is really just about you know, introducing yourself first, asking if it's on the phone, asking people, are they okay to talk? Because I think with mobile phones now, people can be anywhere doing anything and they'll pick their phone up. So we always do check in and say, is it a good time to talk, or can I call you back later? And yeah, so I guess when we're doing home visits, the same sort of things of being respectful that it's somebody else's home and we're a visitor, and they've invited us in and into their homes and their lives. And it's actually really amazing what people will share with us, I think. Do you have anything to add, Iris?
I just wanted to make sure if you are visiting, and I don't know in terms of your roles, but if you are visiting people in their homes, which are obviously damaged post-disaster, post-floods, please make sure that you are safe when you go there. That's kind of essential because, you know, we often talk about the oxygen masks in the plane. You know, you first ensure that you have that oxygen mask before you put it on the other person. That goes with the safety. You must ensure that you are safe, because if you are not safe in the house, that means that you cannot provide information to the person you're visiting. And safety is not just, you know, because of the structural damage. There's also dogs. You know, does the family have dogs on a property? And we all love dogs. Majority of humans like dogs, but remember that even the little Chihuahua can be a very vicious animal in the house. So make sure to ask those questions, and don't be scared to ask for families to put their animals away while you are visiting. You know, just make sure that, again, that they are safe to talk to you, so there are no other people listening to your conversation. So ensuring those kind of basics that sometimes we ignore and we think it will be okay, but we have to ensure that we ask those questions. Always remember, if nothing else, remember that oxygen mask from the plane. Put it on yourself first. The green one.
It's excellent. Thank you, Iris. Thank you, Chris. I have also, again, learned so much. I think for me so far, some of the big ones that are sticking out to me, Joe, from your presentation, some of those phrases that you gave me, my visit helps with the next stage of the process. I'm not necessarily the one making the decisions here, but this is all part of the next steps to resolve your issue. And Iris and Chris, the PowerPoint slide, one of them, it showed information, like with the decision-making process you can think about before you speak. Is this information important? Is it needed? Information overload is a real challenge for people, particularly when they've got, as has been mentioned, 10 people coming through their house from 10 different perspectives. So those are some wonderful key messages that I'm sticking down. So everyone, it's the chance now for us all to break out into virtual groups and discuss with each other what we've learned and what we've gained from this presentation, but also think about what questions you'd like to ask the speakers, what things you'd like them to delve into further. So Matthew has set you up to be in virtual breakout rooms, each of which are chaired by a member of the Young Floodplain Management Queensland Committee. They'll step up and they'll introduce yourselves and facilitate discussion. before we go into those rooms, I'm also just going to quickly launch a poll for everyone here, just to help us during the panel discussion understand the background of the people that we're speaking to. So feel free to fill out that poll, and Matthew, feel free to launch the breakout rooms. Okay, we are back in the main room. I'm hoping that we have everyone back and that no one's been lost out in who knows where in the internet, but the poll is back up and we're getting a sense of where everyone's from and what they do. I'll just give you another 10 seconds to answer that. And then I'll end it so we can all have a little look at who is who in the room. Okay. So I'll share those results. I think it should be up on your screen now, but if not, I'll talk through it. So we have actually a decent amount of people in the room with a lot of experience, which is excellent. Thank you for joining our webinar. Most people in this webinar are from the consulting environment as opposed to government or other. We have, pretty much everyone an engineer. We have a spread of people from Brisbane and some people who have snuck in who are not from Queensland. That's all right. You're welcome. You're welcome to come along. About half of the people speak to members of the public affected by flooding all the time. And also decently about half feel comfortable doing it, which is really lovely to see. So we're going to move into the panel session now. I'll just make sure that our speakers are able to chat. Yes. Joe, I'll ask you to unmute as well. Great. Okay, so looks like everyone was having lots of discussion in the breakout rooms. One of the big themes everyone was curious about talking about more was emotional engagement when you're having conversations with members of the public affected by flooding. How do you maintain your own psychological safety? How do you maintain your boundaries with respect to empathy? Oh, nope, sorry. Still got everyone. I've got a hung up noise. I thought it was me for a second. How do you maintain those boundaries? How do you maintain your own psychological health and safety whilst being compassionate in the circumstances? What are your coping mechanisms?
Who wants to start? Okay. I guess just in terms of dealing with what we've listened to, that was part of it, wasn't it? I was going down the whole self-care supervision road, just around, firstly, boundaries and understanding when we need to keep boundaries in place, because it is very easy to get involved in people's stories. And if we're being empathic to people, we actually are coming and trying to understand things from their perspective. And I guess that's about having that strength ourselves. Definitely before we go into any sort of situation like that, we do a self-check. That's about reflecting on how we're coping, how we're going with everything in our life. I guess we work in an organisation where we do have supervision built into our practice. But it's also about, I think, having that sort of relationship with your manager or supervisor where you can say, hey, I'm not feeling like I can go in there today. I really need to have a break, whether that be I need a day off, because we have seen definitely in the recovery centre space where workers do burn out. They do become very distressed. In fact, one worker that we spoke with, she needed to listen to people's stories for her funding, to provide funding, but she was just taking everyone's story. She was teary, she was emotional herself. So I guess in terms of supporting her, you know, just suggesting ways that she could liaise with her manager, liaise to just take a break. I mean, we sat with her, gave her that break by talking with her and, you know, being that support person for her. But it's not only about doing those things for other people, it's about doing it for ourselves and also being open to other people saying, hey, you don't look okay. Maybe you need to take a break. And sometimes that can just be make a cup of tea, or, you know, half the time if you're busy, you might not get to drink the cup of tea, but it can just be about giving yourself that little mental break as well. If you're seeing a lot of people and you're very busy and you're finding that you're not coping yourself. But I definitely say around supervision and support from peers and managers, and that's my take. But
I think going into any situation, I'm kind of talking from my own perspective, and I think it works for other people, is make sure that you are prepared. That's the first thing. Prepare yourself from every single details, know about the event. So be prepared that you know what was the event and which situation you are walking into and what stories you can prepare yourself to expect. But it's also being prepared, having a pen, having a notebook, having all those little things as well that are so important for you when you walk in to talk to someone, making sure that you had your meal. So again, it's not just that emotional readiness, it's the physical readiness as well to go and start very difficult conversations sometimes. Allow yourself to feel. So that's a very important thing. So we work in a mental health and we hear some very distressing stories. Well, I think 100% of stories we hear are very distressing stories of human suffering. And you will be hearing those stories as well when you walk to talk to someone who has been impacted by a disaster. Prepare yourself that you will be hearing those stories. Make sure that you had a good night's sleep. Don't go to listen to those distressing stories. If you are tired, if you think about your child having a swimming meet, and if you're thinking, oh, I need to finish this in 15 minutes, and that's as much time as I have because I have to run and pick up my kids or whatever. So allow yourself to the extra time, the extra space, emotional and physical, and all the other things, you know, to engage and listen to those stories. But also make sure that you are self-reflective enough that you know when you had enough. And that's kind of when your cup of, tolerance and stress, it has reached a limit. And don't be like that camel that had its back broken because of the last straw. Just allow yourself that you can feel tired and that you can experience fatigue and that you can be the one who is saying, I can't deal anymore with listening to these stories. And at that point, it's very important that you have a good relationship with your line managers, with your colleagues, so you can approach them and talk to someone. What we often talk about in disaster recovery work is having a buddy. So one of your colleagues that you trust and that knows you really well and who can recognize those little things in you and can point out and say, hey, maybe you need to go and have a break. Hey, maybe what about this? So you have that person that you are comfortable enough that can call some of the behaviors that you are exhibiting. So you have that person to check in. I think that's it. I could talk about, I'm the person who can talk a lot about these things. So I'll stop because I know there are other questions and I'm sure Jo will want to add her opinions as well. So I'll stop.
I agree with just having someone. I know I wasn't good with boundaries when I first started back in this flood recovery work, mainly because of my workload. There was a lot of different things going on. We're a little bit understaffed and just the amount of people we were trying to help through their recovery. So I wasn't real good at those boundaries, but now we have a team. I have a team around me. There's 6 of us all together. And yeah, getting someone else to step in for you or step forward with you at any stage is a really good idea. And just being able to offload when you get back to the office or the centre or wherever, just particularly with people that you work with, because they already understand the work that you're doing, so, and may have had, you know, similar experiences too. So yeah, I think that's really key for sure.
Iris, you started touching on it there, but there was definitely the feeling that sometimes people get thrown into this situation and they haven't necessarily had the training. With foresight, let's say, if you had the time to go and get specific training, or if you're preparing for a specific conversation with an individual, how do you go about finding the resources for that individual about the local community centre? Or if you have the time to get some training before you enter this field at all, are there particular trainings that you would recommend?
There are lots of trainings, but I'll keep it very simple and relevant. I think that anyone going into talking with people who experience, whether that's a disaster, natural kind of disaster, or human-made disaster, or any critical event or incident, whether that is within a workplace, something happens, or it is outside, it is essential, I believe, to complete the psychological first aid training. So you can complete it, and Chris did mention there are multiple avenues where you can go and access the training through the Australian Red Cross. There are multiple online portals where you can go. The Phoenix, Australia, that is a leading trauma, school of they are offering online training, or you can contact us and we can deliver the training as well. And then engage into the regular community of practice on psychological first aid. We have done, Chris and I and Joe, I'm sure we have done lots of trainings throughout our work, just like you did. And it's like, if you don't practice it, you forget how to use those skills. Those are the skills that are kind of stored somewhere in the back of your mind, but it's almost you didn't practice it. It's not a bike, you actually need to practice those skills to keep fresh. So what we found is having a monthly community of practice where we pull apart those skills continually through discussion, through using real life scenarios, are actually improving and keeping us fresh when we are faced with these situations. So that would be my first kind of starting point. And you can access through Department of Communities. They have a little link as well for the psychological first aid. So there are lots of, if you just type in, you can find different places that provide the PFA training. That's the first, I think. Then the other thing is, and I'm sure you in your organizations, I'm sure you have the difficult conversations training. So that would be another one, because it will prepare you and give you skills, for some more challenging conversations you have, as well as the management of some more complex behaviors as well, because you will face those and you will need to know how to, again, ensure your safety and how do you exit if you are faced with some difficult, possibly risky situations.
Can
We
I just
usually
say,
actually send out.
Oh,
Go ahead, Joe.
I know, I was just going to add about the neighbourhood centres, the access
thank you.
centres and information. So in Queensland, there's a peak body called Neighbourhood Centres Queensland, but most states have a peak body, and they will have community centres listed and contact details. Not all community centres are the same. Some are, sort of focused on disaster recovery and are part of the conversation and the conferences and things like that. We've just started a network in Brisbane called the Brisbane Neighbourhood Centre Disaster Network. So there's a number of us in that across the Brisbane region, sort of working together. And as community workers across the Brisbane LGA, we try and refer people into their nearest community centre. They don't need to come to us all the time. We'll focus on specific things, but if there's other things that they need, they can, or support with just documentation, things like that, we can link them into their community centre. But we try and do that warmly as well. We don't just send people, wildly anywhere. So but the information's there anyway.
What I was going to say is we usually send through the FMA a notification when these recordings are available on the FMA website. Maybe I'll touch base with yourselves to get links to the different PFA courses or to those various places that people can research before they enter in these conversations. We might just squeeze in 2 more questions. So if you're in a situation and it's a conversation and you're noticing it escalating, any tips on how to diffuse it, or any tips on how to recognize that it's a point in time where you should just exit and come back another day?
Good question. Cup of tea. No, kidding. Yeah, look, I guess I think most of us can probably recognize when people are escalating, becoming angry. You know, and it can be a fine line between somebody expressing frustration and anger, and then you know, really just becoming quite difficult to deal with, and having to either exit yourself. And I think that comes back to, if you're doing home visits, always make sure that you have an easy exit. You know, don't park in a driveway and get blocked in, things like that. Because I don't know, I mean, Joe, I think home visits quite a bit and probably comes across this sort of thing as well, in day-to-day life, where, yeah, people are in that situation where they're more likely to be angry. But I think I know for me, it's always been that kind of trying to keep that clinical calm going. I think, you know, because if people are escalating and they see us start to escalate and get very anxious, that can actually increase all those emotions as well. So I've always found that just trying to remain calm, you know, acknowledging that people are in that difficult situation, that it's a difficult time for them. Most people in this situation would be feeling angry and frustrated. You know, we see people that are in similar situations and are feeling, you know, like you are at the moment. So just kind of trying to express that you're understanding how they're feeling. Yeah, I don't know. Have you got anything else on that one, Joe, just around?
I think just because we deal with so much in our job, like there's so much, it's so paperwork heavy for people, and they're having to backtrack on things all the time. For example, I had an older fella in here this morning. English is not his first language. We need to find an insurance document. The flood happened, you know, 2 years ago. His work was finished at least 12 months ago. It was impossible to find it. It hopefully won't delay for too long, but the process gets delayed if they can't find what they need. But we'd already gotten what we needed today. We tried to find this other thing, and I could see that he was getting distressed. And so I just said to him, we don't need to do this today. We can find that later. In the meantime, if you've got the energy and you feel like going through your emails, you know, that's great, but let's not stress about it today. I think with it, when we do home visits, initial home visits, we always go in pairs. But yeah, it's a big, people are just under the pump so much, and they've been in that state for so long now, and they've, as Chris said, they're still living in homes that are uninhabitable to some people, but they have no choice. So you can understand that frustration and the escalation. So I guess I just arrive at a point where I go, hey, it looks like we've done all that we, you know, as much as we can do today, like given how you're feeling, let's just break it into steps. This is a great step that we've gotten through today. I can give you a call tomorrow, or check in this afternoon, and we'll do another step tomorrow, or, you know, next week, or just go at their pace, you know. Yeah.
I think it's really important to remember that sometimes we feel almost scared to say to people, you know, and to tell them, well, if you are feeling, from the start, and it should be quite from the start, clear that if they are starting to feel frustrated or they don't want to continue, that you can stop that conversation. Also, I'm not sure how you get referrals for your clients, but you will probably get some information and flag some certain behavior that's potentially risky for you, or there potentially might be some situations that you would be exposed to. Straight away from the onset, I usually say to people who have some history and some flags, I would tell them, I come in and I really want to leave with my pretty face intact for my family. And it's a bit of a joke as well, and it kind of relaxes the situation, but it's also a quite clear message that I'm not going to take any kind of abusive behavior, aggressive behavior, and I will leave. So it's quite clear from the onset, and please feel free to set those boundaries from the start. Don't get yourself kind of in a situation where you don't know how to exit. Just set it out from the start.
Yeah.
Those are some excellent tips. I like that pretty face joke. I'm going to use that. We'll squish in one final question before we close today. So one of the things that we and floodplain managers sometimes get involved in is, after a flood, trying to gather data from people to help us understand what occurred. We can be talking to people to try and get accounts from them about where the water came from, how high it got to. Do you have any advice for engineers and scientists on how to approach people for this information when the memory might not be fresh, and still gain meaningful answers, but without creating too much stress about reliving that event?
Trauma, impact, and memory is a big field, and again, that would probably take days, not a 5-minute answer. So we know that trauma impacts the right side of the brain, which is basically our language center. So people often, and we know that post, for example, child sexual abuse and any type of abuse, children won't have the words to describe what has happened. It's the same situation, the same centers are impacted after the big disasters. So people sometimes won't have the right words to express what's happening. It doesn't mean that they are withholding the information. It just means that they can't describe what has happened. So be patient. That's the main thing that I can tell you. Just be patient and allow time for people to give you that information. And I know that we are all under the time pressure to get everything now, because it has to happen and we need to process things. But in these situations, when we are working with people who are impacted by major event, allow that time for them to process and answer the questions. And they might need to go back and give you more details. So the first information or first disclosure might not be full disclosure. So they might need to go back, and you need to go back and ask those questions again.
And maybe Alana also ask them if they actually can't remember these things on the spot and whatever, ask them if they'd prefer to do it with a support person there, or maybe a neighbour who may have witnessed it, but is doing okay. Maybe wasn't fully their house wasn't flooded, but they helped that person out or something. A support person's always a really good idea, I think.
All right, that's really excellent. Thank you. Like I said, I've written notes because I'm going to use this probably this afternoon and a couple of phone calls, let alone for the rest of my career. So thank you again so much, everyone, for participating in the call. Thank you to our speakers for donating their time. This webinar has been recorded. It will be saved onto the FMA members section of the website for your later viewing. And we look forward to seeing some of you, hopefully, at our next event, which will be the Tri-Water Innovation Challenge on the 21st of May at the Brisbane Convention Centre for the FMA conference. And until then, and if not, hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar. Thank you all.